You have probably eaten it hundreds of times, maybe thousands. It smells like Sunday mornings. It sizzles in the pan. It sits on the plate next to your eggs and your toast, and it feels like comfort and tradition wrapped into one crispy strip. But what I'm about to tell you, what 35 years of clinical practice and a mountain of peer reviewed cardiovascular research has made absolutely impossible for me to ignore, is that for every person in this room over the age of 60, that breakfast food is doing something to your arteries that you cannot feel, cannot see, and will not know about until the damage is already done. My name is Dr. James Mercer. I am a board certified physician with 35 years of practice and over 40,000 patients treated. And today I am going to do what very few doctors take the time to do in a 15-minute appointment. I am going to tell you the complete truth about bacon, sausage, and processed breakfast meats, what they are actually doing inside the cardiovascular system of a person your age, and what you can eat instead that will protect your heart starting this week. The breakfast food I am talking about is processed meat, bacon, breakfast sausage, ham slices, processed deli meats layered on a morning sandwich. These are the foods that appear on American breakfast plates every single day in diners, in kitchens, in senior living communities, and they are, without question, among the most cardiovascularly destructive foods you can eat after the age of 60. I want you to understand that I am not talking about eating red meat in general. The science on that is more nuanced. I am talking specifically about processed meat. And the word processed here has a very specific scientific definition. According to both the American Heart Association and the 2026 updated dietary guidance for cardiovascular health published in the journal Circulation, processed meats are any meat products that have been preserved through smoking, curing, salting, or the addition of chemical preservatives. Bacon, sausage, hot dogs, bologna, salami, ham. These are not simply pork or beef in a different form. They have been chemically and structurally altered in ways that make them fundamentally different from the unprocessed versions. And that difference is what matters to your heart. Let me tell you exactly why this becomes so dangerous after 60 specifically. Because the biology of aging creates a vulnerability in the cardiovascular system that makes processed meat exponentially more harmful to someone your age than it was when you were 40. Here is what happens inside your arteries as you age. The inner lining of every artery in your body is covered by a single layer of cells called the endothelium. Think of the endothelium as the master regulator of your cardiovascular system. It controls blood pressure by releasing a gas called nitric oxide that relaxes and dilates blood vessels. It prevents blood clots by keeping the interior surface of the artery smooth. It regulates inflammation by controlling which immune signals the vessel wall responds to. And it monitors blood flow, constantly adjusting the diameter of your arteries to match demand. In a healthy young person, the endothelium performs all of these functions flawlessly. But after 60, through a combination of decades of cumulative oxidative stress, hormonal changes, reduced physical activity, and the natural aging process, the endothelium begins to lose its functional efficiency. The cells produce less nitric oxide. The arterial walls become progressively stiffer. The smooth interior surface of the artery, the surface that was once like polished glass to circulating blood, develops microscopic areas of roughness and inflammation. And those rough areas become the attachment points for the very first plaques that eventually block arterial flow. This is the medical reality of cardiovascular aging, and it happens gradually, invisibly, and completely silently until suddenly it does not, until the morning you wake up with chest pressure, or the afternoon when one side of your face goes numb, or the evening when you cannot catch your breath walking up the stairs. Now, here is where processed breakfast meat enters the equation. And I want you to pay very close attention to what I am about to describe, because the chemicals in bacon and sausage do not just add calories or saturated fat. They specifically target the biological vulnerabilities of the aging cardiovascular system in three separate and compounding mechanisms. The first mechanism is sodium. A single serving of bacon, just 3 slices, contains somewhere between 400 and 600 milligrams of sodium, depending on the brand and preparation. A single breakfast sausage link adds another 150 to 200 milligrams. The American Heart Association recommends that adults, and especially adults over 60, consume no more than 1,500 milligrams of sodium per day because aging kidneys process sodium less efficiently, and aging arteries respond to sodium-induced fluid retention with much greater blood pressure elevation than younger arteries do. When you eat a processed meat breakfast before 9 in the morning, you may already be at half or more of your entire day's safe sodium allowance, and that sodium does not sit quietly in your stomach. It enters the bloodstream within hours. Sodium draws water into the bloodstream through osmosis, increasing the volume of blood your heart must pump with every beat. That increased volume raises blood pressure. Chronically elevated blood pressure, even in the range that doctors used to call borderline or prehypertension, progressively damages the endothelial lining of every artery in your body. It physically stresses the arterial wall with every single heartbeat. And after 60, when those arteries are already stiffer and less elastic than they used to be, that stress accelerates the degradation far faster than in a younger person. The second mechanism is saturated fat. Bacon is roughly 50% fat by caloric content. A significant portion of that fat is saturated. Saturated fat raises LDL cholesterol, the form that deposits into arterial plaques. But here is the piece that most cholesterol conversations miss entirely. LDL cholesterol itself is not the full problem. The problem is what happens when LDL particles become oxidized, when free radicals strip electrons from the LDL molecule and transform it into a damaged reactive compound. Oxidized LDL is the form that the immune system attacks. Oxidized LDL is what triggers the inflammatory cascade that causes the arterial plaque to grow. And oxidized LDL is what eventually causes a stable plaque to rupture, which is the biological event that causes a heart attack or stroke. The saturated fat in processed breakfast meat does double damage in someone over 60. First, it raises the LDL particle count in the bloodstream, and second, it contributes to the oxidative environment in which that LDL becomes dangerous. In a 35-year-old with fully functional endothelium and robust antioxidant defenses, the body can partially buffer this. In a 68-year-old with age-related endothelial dysfunction already in progress, there is far less biological reserve to absorb that oxidative load. The same breakfast hits harder, penetrates deeper, does more lasting damage. The third mechanism is the one that most of your doctors have never mentioned, and it is the one that I have become most focused on in the last 15 years of my practice because I believe it is the most insidious of all: nitrates and nitrites. These are the chemical preservatives used in bacon, sausage, hot dogs, deli meats, and virtually every other processed meat product to extend shelf life, prevent bacterial growth, and give these products their characteristic pink color. Sodium nitrite is injected or rubbed into meat during processing. Sodium nitrate is a precursor form that breaks down into nitrite over time. When these compounds enter the human digestive system, and particularly when they are heated at high temperatures during cooking, they can form compounds called nitrosamines. And nitrosamines are among the most well-documented cardiovascular toxins in the food supply. Animal research has shown that nitrate preservatives experimentally promote endothelial dysfunction, which means they directly damage the inner lining of arteries. They promote atherosclerosis, the buildup of plaque inside arterial walls, and they reduce the body's ability to process insulin properly, contributing to insulin resistance, which is itself an independent cardiovascular risk factor. Research published in the Harvard School of Public Health examining dietary data from thousands of individuals found that each 50-gram daily serving of processed meat, roughly equivalent to 2 slices of bacon or 1 breakfast sausage link, was associated with a 42% higher risk of developing heart disease compared to people who did not eat processed meat regularly. That is not a small association. That is not a marginal trend. That is a near doubling of cardiovascular risk from a food that millions of American seniors eat every single morning, believing it to be a normal, harmless part of a traditional breakfast. And a 2026 updated scientific statement from the American Heart Association published in Circulation was unequivocal. The guidance states that processed meats are consistently associated with increased cardiovascular risk, not possibly associated, not weakly associated, consistently associated, and the clinical recommendation is to minimize, ideally eliminate, or processed meat consumption in adults, particularly those in higher cardiovascular risk categories. People over 60 are by definition in a higher cardiovascular risk category. I have sat across from thousands of patients who looked at me in genuine disbelief when I explained this to them. They thought they were making a reasonable breakfast choice. They had swapped white toast for whole grain. They had stopped putting sugar in their coffee. They were trying, and they had no idea that the 3 strips of bacon they had been eating every morning since retirement were systematically undermining everything else they were doing for their cardiovascular health. That is not their fault. That is a failure of the communication that should be happening in doctors' offices across this country. So let me do now what those appointments so rarely allow time for. Here is the exact protocol for what to do starting this week. And I am going to give you replacements that are not just healthier, but actually satisfying, because I know that for someone who has enjoyed a traditional American breakfast for 60 years, telling you to stop without offering you something in its place is medical advice that will last exactly 3 days. The first replacement is what I call the Cardiovascular Protein Foundation. 2 to 3 whole eggs cooked without vegetable oils. Eggs have been extensively rehabilitated in the nutrition science of the past decade. Contrary to what was believed for much of the 20th century, the dietary cholesterol in eggs does not raise blood cholesterol meaningfully in the vast majority of people. What it does provide is the highest quality protein available in any single food, a complete amino acid profile, choline for brain health, lutein and zeaxanthin for eye protection, and vitamin K2, which specifically helps prevent calcium from depositing in arterial walls and redirects it toward bone where it belongs. Cook your eggs in extra virgin olive oil or a small amount of butter, not canola oil, not vegetable oil, not cooking spray. The fat vehicle matters. Olive oil adds cardiovascular protection. Industrial seed oils add cardiovascular risk. The second replacement is one that I recommend to virtually every senior patient I see who mentions morning hunger and energy crashes. Plain full-fat Greek yogurt with no added sugar, topped with a tablespoon of ground flaxseed and a small handful of walnuts. Here's what this combination does for your cardiovascular system. The Greek yogurt provides high-quality protein and live probiotic cultures that research is increasingly linking to reduced systemic inflammation and improved cardiovascular risk markers. The ground flaxseed delivers plant-based omega-3 fatty acids and lignans, phytoestrogen compounds that have been associated in research with reduced blood pressure and arterial plaque stability. The walnuts add additional omega-3 fatty acids, specifically ALA, plus arginine, an amino acid that is a direct precursor to the nitric oxide your endothelium needs to maintain vascular flexibility. This combination, eaten together in the morning, is doing the opposite of what bacon and sausage do. Instead of inflaming the endothelium and stiffening arteries, it is providing the building blocks for endothelial repair and nitric oxide production. The third replacement that I want to tell you about is one of the most underestimated heart protective breakfast choices available to a person your age. Cooked oats, not instant oats from a flavored packet. Plain rolled oats or steel-cut oats cooked in water or low-fat milk. The distinction matters enormously. Flavored instant oats are loaded with added sugar that drives the very insulin resistance and triglyceride elevation you are trying to avoid. Plain oats contain a specific soluble fiber called beta-glucan. Beta-glucan is the most extensively studied dietary compound for LDL cholesterol reduction. It works by forming a gel-like substance in the digestive tract that binds to cholesterol-containing bile acids and removes them from the body before they can be reabsorbed and returned to circulation. Study after study has confirmed that regular oat consumption reduces LDL cholesterol in a clinically meaningful way. Add to your oatmeal a half teaspoon of cinnamon, which research has shown helps stabilize blood sugar responses and reduce post-meal glucose spikes. and a tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil stirred in at the end, which sounds unusual but adds the oleocanthal anti-inflammatory benefit I described in a previous video. The cardiovascular protection you get from this breakfast is the mirror image of the cardiovascular damage you were sustaining from the processed meat version. Now, let me tell you what I call the invisible timeline, because one of the reasons this conversation is so urgent and why I am being so direct with you today is that the damage from daily processed meat consumption does not announce itself. It does not come with pain. It does not trigger an alarm. It accumulates in the walls of your coronary arteries, in the walls of the carotid arteries that supply your brain, silently, slowly, over months and years of daily exposure. The first symptom in a significant percentage of heart attack victims is the heart attack itself. There is no warning. There is no gradual buildup of discomfort that gives you a chance to course correct. The warning is what I am giving you right now in this video today. I have watched this pattern unfold in my practice more times than I care to count. A patient at 62 is eating a traditional processed meat breakfast every day. They feel fine. Their blood pressure is slightly elevated, but not alarming. Their cholesterol is borderline. Their doctor prescribes a statin and tells them to watch their diet without specifying what that means. At 67, they have a cardiac event. And in the weeks that follow, when we go back through their dietary history and identify the daily processed meat habit that was running in the background for years, there is always this moment, this look, this quiet realization that someone should have told them sooner. I am telling you now, not later, now. Here is what most doctors will never explain about the food industry's relationship to your breakfast choices. The processed meat industry in the United States generates more than $80 billion per year. That is a financial infrastructure with significant reach into the institutions that shape public nutritional guidance. The decades-long messaging campaign that made bacon and sausage synonymous with a hearty, protein-rich, traditional American breakfast was not spontaneous. It was cultivated, advertised, and embedded into the cultural identity of breakfast in this country by an industry with every financial incentive to make sure you never stop buying it. I am not a conspiracy theorist. I am a physician who reads the cardiovascular literature. And what the literature says, what the American Heart Association says, what the 2026 updated circulation guidelines say, what the Harvard School of Public Health has published repeatedly is clear. Processed meat is consistently associated with increased cardiovascular risk. The people best positioned to hear that message and act on it are the ones whose cardiovascular risk is already elevated. People over 60, people like you. You deserve to know what the science actually says, not the watered down, don't change too much or they'll stop coming back version. The actual science, which is why we are having this conversation here instead of in a 15-minute appointment where I spend half the time on paperwork and half the time trying to address 3 separate health concerns simultaneously. Now, let me give you 3 futures, and I want you to really picture each one. In the first future, you hear this today and decide it does not really apply to you. You have eaten this way your whole life and you are fine. You feel fine right now. The change feels unnecessary and the breakfast feels too comfortable to give up. 6 months from now, 12 months from now, the silent process continues inside your arteries exactly as it has been. The endothelium continues to sustain the sodium-driven pressure damage. The nitrate exposure continues to impair vascular function. The oxidized LDL continues to accumulate in the arterial wall. The plaque grows imperceptibly but consistently. Nothing has changed, except the window for meaningful prevention has narrowed. In the second future, you cut back to 3 times per week. This is an improvement. The cumulative daily exposure is reduced. The arterial damage slows. Some of the nitrate burden decreases, but the biology of processed meat inflammation does not have a safe level in someone your age. It has a lower level of damage. And 3 times per week still provides regular endothelial insults to a cardiovascular system that is already working against an aging backdrop. Partial improvement yields partial protection, better than nothing, but not what you deserve. In the third future, you make the swap this week. The eggs and olive oil breakfast replaces the bacon. The plain oatmeal with flaxseed and walnuts rotates in on alternate mornings. The processed sausage and ham disappear from the weekly grocery list. And within 30 days, not 6 months, within 30 days, something measurable begins to shift. The daily sodium load on your cardiovascular system drops by hundreds of milligrams every morning. The nitrate exposure that was inflaming your endothelium every day stops. The LDL raising saturated fat intake from breakfast decreases, while the LDL lowering beta glucan from oats increases. Your arteries begin receiving a different set of morning instructions, and those instructions point toward protection rather than damage. The heart you have at 75 is partly the result of the breakfast you ate at 65. That equation is still open, it is still being written, and you can change what it says starting tomorrow morning. Here is my personal medical opinion on this, and I am going to say it without hedging because you deserve honesty and not corporate speak. If I have a patient over 60 who is eating processed breakfast meat every morning and they have any of the following: elevated blood pressure, borderline cholesterol, a family history of heart disease, diabetes, or excess abdominal weight, I tell them to stop, not reduce, stop. The combined cardiovascular risk profile of processed meat in the context of an aging endothelium is simply not worth the breakfast habit. The flavors can be replicated. The protein can be obtained elsewhere. The sodium, the nitrates, and the oxidized fat load cannot be undone by anything else you eat that day. Remove the source. This is what I would tell my own parents. This is what I tell my patients who ask me directly what I would do. Stop the processed breakfast meat. Replace it with foods that are actively protecting the cardiovascular system you need to carry you through the next 20 years of your life. Before you go today, I want your honest answer in the comments. How many days per week do you currently eat bacon, sausage, or another processed breakfast meat? Tell me below. Your answer helps me understand what the people watching this channel need most from me, and I read every single one. If this conversation changed something for you today, hit that subscribe button right now. Every week I come back here and I give you the honest medical information that the system rarely makes time for. Next week, we are going to talk about a specific blood pressure number that your doctor checks at every appointment, but almost never explains to you correctly. And for people over 60, misunderstanding that number could be costing you something you cannot afford to lose. I am Dr. James Mercer. Take care of that heart. I will see you next week.